If council could be seated, we could go ahead and start this meeting. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's City Council special meeting for Monday, October 10th. I will call this meeting to order, and if you're able to do so, if you could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. City Clerk, if you're able to take roll call.
Yes, good evening. Member Anderson?
Present.
Member Newnenkamp?
Present.
Member Russell?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Present.
Member Wink?
Present.
Member Woodward?
Present.
Mayor Sierra?
Present.
All 7 present.
Thank you. A few study session agenda items for tonight. We're starting up first with proposed revisions to the Municipal Code regarding telecommunications in the right-of-way. We have City Attorney Tamara Niles and outside counsel Colleen McCroskey here to present proposals to amend Municipal Code regarding telecommunications. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, and Council. I think I had a PowerPoint presentation, but we can go ahead without it if not. So,
It may be on the clicker.
there we go. Look at that. So if you guys remember last time I was here, we were talking a lot about wireless siting in the city and what types of things the city can do to kind of deal with some of the issues that we spoke about when providers are looking to deploy their infrastructure in Inglewood. So since that meeting, my firm has taken a very hard look at Inglewood's wireless code, and we have made a lot of revisions in an attempt to both comply with federal and state regulations and retain Inglewood's local authority to the fullest extent possible. So those are our 2 goals here. We want to make sure that we are compliant with what the FCC tells us, but we also want to make sure that we can utilize those rules so that Inglewood can, again, retain the most local authority that it can. So a couple of starting considerations, Inglewood's current wireless code is fairly small, which actually made my job a lot easier, so thank you. But we had to reorganize a lot. The vast majority of the really substantive provisions of the code were under what is called now general guidelines. So a lot of those provisions and requirements have been moved to what we have now drafted into the code. We have a separate section for design standards, we have a separate section for operational standards, and things like lighting and fencing requirements that were previously in the general guidelines section are now going to be found in design standards. Things like radio frequency issues, those are now in operational standards rather than just kind of one catch-all provision. Something else we did was really flesh out the definition section of this portion of the code. The FCC has a lot of very telecommunications specific language, a lot of terms of art that mean one thing when we use it in regular conversation and mean something completely different when the FCC uses it. Some of those definitions are concealment camouflage, eligible facilities request, we'll talk about that in a little bit, and small cell facilities, which are those deployments that I think have been on everyone's radar recently. It's also important to note that this is an initial draft. This is not in final form. We are going to get more feedback from the city. We are going to have more discussions with staff. This is very much a first draft. We want everyone to know what the bigger changes are. And then again, we're going to continue talking to the city, talking to the staff to make sure that the specifics are exactly what Inglewood wants. First thing I want to talk about is design standards. You may remember from the last time I was here that this is the area where local governments retain the most amount of authority. The FCC tried to take that away, and it went all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Ninth Circuit said, no, local governments get to decide what small cell facilities can look like. So whereas Inglewood's current code, again, is fairly small, not super comprehensive, we have now added design standards for every single type of telecommunications infrastructure that might be deployed in Inglewood. That includes base stations, towers, something called alternative tower structures, small cell facilities, antennas, poles, you name it, we have included it, and there are fairly strict design standards within what the FCC says that we can do for those pieces of infrastructure. One of the major things that we've done is require that all of these types of infrastructure, with the exception of towers, be what's called concealed. So those are two of the definitions I just mentioned. That's when I say conceal in regular conversation, right, we think that just means hidden. That is not what the FCC means. When it comes to a wireless facility, if it is concealed, it has to look like something other than a wireless facility. It has to be a reasonable person looking at it would not think this is a tower, this is a small cell facility, this is a pole. Camouflaged means that it's something that's blended into the surrounding environment. We have required all infrastructure where feasible to be concealed rather than camouflaged, because that we believe is going to be better for residents of the city. That's also important because when it comes to that thing called eligible facilities requests, that is a request from a provider for a modification of a piece of existing wireless infrastructure. And those are requests that local governments must grant. They are obligated to grant if they meet certain standards. However, if that eligible facilities request would defeat concealment, the concealment elements of an existing wireless communications facility, that's one reason that local governments are allowed to deny those eligible facilities request applications. So when we require concealment on the front end for new infrastructure being deployed, when the provider comes back a couple years later and says, I want to modify this, the city has more authority to say no, or to require that it's concealed consistent with what that structure already looks like. Something I believe we spoke about last time were setbacks, which is how far the piece of wireless infrastructure needs to be from a dwelling, home, business. This is something that comes up in a lot of communities, and it can be fairly difficult because the FCC has not given us a bright line rule. They have not told us this setbacks are allowed here, these setbacks are allowed there. So everyone really, the numbers that we've put in this code are ones that my firm is comfortable with, that are compliant with FCC. We do not feel that there is going to be a lot of liability there. If the city is interested in increasing those setbacks, that's something we can do, but I would not advise that that is without risk. So that's something that we can continue to discuss with city and staff as we go through this process. As it stands right now, we're requiring that in residential zones, all communications facilities are set back 100% of the height of the facility. And then in non-residential zones, they need to be greater than, must not be closer than the greater of the minimum building setback. So if there's a minimum building setback in that zone, that piece of infrastructure can't be any closer than that. Again, this is a starting point, and we'll continue to discuss this with city and staff. Something else that we've added are very specific review procedures for the types of infrastructure that are going to be deployed in the city. The FCC has given us very strict requirements for reviewing eligible facilities requests and small cell facilities. We now have those written into the code. That is very important, we've found, because some of these can be fairly esoteric and nuanced. There is a tolling procedure where if the provider gives you an application and it's incomplete, you can toll the shot clock, but then you can't toll it again and you can't ask for more information. It's a lot. And so by really getting those specifics into the code, it just makes it easier for staff when those applications come across their desk. It just really clarifies it for everyone. Something else that I think is very important is that in the code as written, towers are listed as a permitted use in all districts except for residential and residential and commercial zones. We have changed that, so all towers are going to be under a conditional use procedure, because those are the big ugly ones. We've also prohibited towers from being deployed in residential zones, I believe. I'm gonna have to check into that. Last time I was here, I believe we spoke quite a bit about radio frequency issues and the FCC rules around radio frequency emissions and compliance. You'll recall that under federal law, the FCC does have exclusive jurisdiction to regulate those emissions, and local governments may not deny applications on the basis of concerns regarding radio frequency unless that they can demonstrate a lack of compliance with the standards that the FCC sets. Local governments may not require providers to adhere to higher or more stringent radio frequency standards than the FCC does. What we can do is require that the applicants submit a attestation signed not by themselves, but by a verified, qualified third-party engineer saying that this site, when operational, will be compliant with FCC standards. So that's what we want to require at the application phase. We want to make sure that every single provider is going to go to a third party, a qualified third party, and demonstrate that that site will be within RF emissions levels. We do have an open issue. As the code is currently drafted in operational standards, we have language that requires providers to undergo testing if concerns about radio frequency emissions have been brought to the community. The reason I say that that's an open issue is because that has questionable enforceability. Some municipalities feel very strongly about that. They're okay with that, and some aren't. That's something that we, again, are going to want to discuss more as we go through this process. But you should know that there are some municipalities who have chosen to, quote unquote, push the envelope a little bit and include this language that says, if concerns about radio frequency are brought to us, you have to undergo testing and you have to pay for it. Again, we think that that is potentially opening up to some liability, but if that's a risk that the city is willing to take, that's we advise and you decide. So those are really the main points that I wanted to hit. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. McCroskey, for that presentation. Any questions from Council Member Woodward?
Thank you for your presentation. On the camouflage and stuff, now do these companies generally have standard camouflage, or do we come up with something?
So camouflage would mean that it is blended in the surrounding environment, so it's going to be slightly different for each community. Excuse me. A lot of times in a commercial district, for instance, where everything is maybe in neutral tones, they might have something that they deploy in each place. For the most part, I think it's going to be area specific because, again, camouflage means blended into what already exists.
Okay, so concealment, same type of thing, huh?
Yes. And again, concealment means that it looks like something other than a wireless facility.
I'm just thinking of the plastic palm trees in LA
Yes,
or whatever.
yes. And some communities, we call those monopines sometimes, if they're a pine tree, or monopalms. Some communities like those, some communities really don't. That's, again, something that we are going to discuss with staff and hear what the city wants.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. My question is about the potential for requiring testing. What is the nature of the liability with that? Is it they would come sue us for, requiring them to do or expend too much money on something that they feel they've already proven? Or?
That would be the fear. But again, there's going to be a lot of steps that the city and a provider are going to go through before a provider decides to bring legal action against a municipality in any form. So even if this is in the code and a provider doesn't like it, that's something we're going to talk to them about, right? We're not just going to, I don't think they're going to automatically sue the city.
Right.
At the same time, I have had the experience in other communities where providers have been a part of the stakeholder discussions in crafting the municipal code, and they have made very clear that that is something that they will not tolerate.
So is that because is it really expensive to test these?
Yes, and because, again, this is kind of in a gray area under FCC rules. The reason we say it has questionable enforceability is because the FCC does not require providers to do that. And so when local governments, again, require something beyond what the FCC requires, it gets into a little bit of a gray area. But if they can demonstrate that they are within those standards, that's what we want to see.
And so what's already required would be required in this is that they provide an engineer's report or something
Yes.
previous to the facility going in. that
Yes, so
would-
this language about the testing would happen after a site is operational. The signed statement by a qualified engineer is going to happen at the application stage.
Okay.
But again, that is what we are requiring. A lot of communities don't require that. They allow providers to self-certify, or they don't require any certification at all. We do like to include the third-party engineer verification.
And the FCC just requires that they self-certify or?
Requires that they certify, it doesn't say by who.
Okay.
And so that's what we think that we can get away with.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Member Russell?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So on camouflage and concealment, would it be obvious to a potential home buyer that there was a cell tower there?
We are likely not going to see those large towers in residential areas, but at the same time, I really can't say. Again, this is in a very initial draft form, and we want to have more discussions with the city about what they expect that to look like.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that somebody wouldn't buy a house and then all of a sudden realize I shouldn't have bought this house.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That is not my area. I'm not sure if that is something that would have to be disclosed. I have to imagine most of these monopine facilities that I see,
It's obvious.
you can tell, yeah.
Okay, and then what does conditional use mean?
That is just going to be a more stringent review procedure or a special use review as opposed to administrative review, which is what we have to do for small cell facilities and eligible facilities requests. Conditional use is going to be a quasi hearing form, and Tamara, please correct me if I'm wrong about that. But it's just a more stringent procedure. The city can require more information from the providers, and the providers have to prove more to the city, for lack of a better word, for the city to grant that use.
So we can set conditions, but they have to be within the law.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Member Woodward, do you have other questions? Or?
I have another question, yes. As one of the conditions, let's say can the city have a condition of prior to installing these that the homeowner is notified and the neighborhood, whether that's through the cell or the tower provider or through the city? And what I'm trying to get at there is on one block, and I'm guessing that that their installation, if it's on the block, it works, probably. And there's somebody that's gonna be totally adamantly against it, and they're gonna move if it's on their property. But the person right next door, like me, I would probably say, no, go ahead and put it up. Thinking that
So I do want to differentiate again between towers and small cell facilities, which are smaller and on a pole. We might refer to those as towers because they are tall and skinny, but that is not what we mean when we say tower.
Okay.
Tower is the big, big guy,
Yeah.
right? And unfortunately, again, the city cannot prohibit the deployment of small cell facilities in any zone. It is a use by right in the state of Colorado in any zone. Providers have the right to deploy those facilities in residential areas. The notice, I would have to look into a little bit further. When it comes to small cell facilities, I'm leaning towards that's something that the city wouldn't want to require, only because the shot clock for review of those the applications for those facilities is very quick turnaround time. And so to add a notification system, either require that of the provider or of the city within a short time frame, is maybe not the best idea. Maybe it is. That's something we would want to discuss a little bit more.
Okay.
When it comes to towers, again, that have a longer review procedure, they're hopefully going to stay under special or conditional review as we've drafted. That would be more likely, I believe, because that's going to be a much longer review period. The city has 150 days to review that application. So notice is going to be a lot more feasible.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I want to go back to the subject of testing. I think of the restaurant industry, and we have health departments that enter your restaurant without your consent while you're in operation. They look around, they make sure you're not doing anything that's going to kill somebody or harm them, and then they let your license continue into the next year. Is there anything that would prohibit Inglewood from providing a similar structure for annual testing to ensure that they remain compliant once they're erected?
That is an excellent question. I'm very glad you brought that up. Something that we do feel fairly confident is not going to be challenged by providers is if a municipality pays for its own testing. And if that municipality is then able to demonstrate that that facility is out of compliance with FCC standards, then we have a lot we can do.
I think it would be helpful in that case for my decision making to get an idea of how much that would cost us. And this may actually be a council request, what RF testing costs in the open market, so that we can plan for that in the budget as if the need arises. Secondly, as I was reading through this, I was a little surprised by the first page where we're changing telecommunications to cover exclusively wireless.
Yes.
What was the reason for that change?
So telecommunications is kind of a term of art under the FCC. You guys may have heard of net neutrality and all of that. Something that is, if you are a telecommunications provider, you are what, for the most part, is what is called a common carrier, and there are a lot of very strict requirements that you are required to adhere to. When it comes to broadband internet, that is in no way the case. And so we wanted this to be a wireless code and not a code that encompasses all of that. The other piece of that is that cable networks are governed by the Federal Cable Act. And so those already have their own set of requirements.
So we've made this exclusive to the area we're discussing tonight in order to avoid confusion, but are we losing something by making
Nope,
that change?
not at all, not at all. It's largely a wording change.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
to make sure that everything is compliant again with the FCC.
So we're not foregoing any regulatory authority that we currently
Not at all,
have? Okay.
not at all.
That's helpful to me. Thank you.
Member Nunnenkamp.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. On the additional RF testing, are you aware of any examples or perhaps any case law where a municipality has required the additional testing and a provider has been found out of compliance?
I am not. I would be happy to look into that. I will say that we recently underwent RF testing with a client. This was not with a municipality, this was a private building. And that was found to be in compliance. That is the only one that I have experienced, the only testing that I have experienced thus far that I've been a part of.
And are there any either FCC or state requirements that after the construction is completed, that any additional testing at that level would need to continue?
No,
Okay,
unfortunately not. Yeah,
thank you.
you're welcome.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on the RF testing thing as well, and I do think maybe this is a council request, and I'd maybe add to it on the cost associated with doing that. And also, are there, I guess there's just an educational component here. Are there different levels of testing? I mean, can you go out and like spot check something? That seems like that would be a cheaper way of testing than monitoring, something for its RF, exposure over a period of time or anything
I
like that.
do want to caveat that I am not a radio frequency engineer, unfortunately. That's why I went to law school. We do work with a law firm whose principal is a radio frequency engineer. If that's something that council would be interested in reaching out to, we'd be happy to make that connection. In general terms, I believe so, yes, because FCC standards, they take the largest amount that a person could be exposed to and then make it like 0.0001 of that, from again, what I understand. I'd be happy to look into this a little bit more for council if you're interested. But it's not that the FCC says, oh, this is the largest amount, you can go this high. From, as far as I'm aware, it's fairly conservative. And there are lots of people who disagree about whether or not those are the correct levels. But from what I understand, the numbers as they are fairly conservative, and there are going to be different standards for different pieces of equipment. A tower is obviously going to emit a lot more radiation than a small antenna.
Right, okay, very good, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I'm gonna go back to the subject of resident notification. In your opinion, we require notification when they pull permits under our current process, as I understand it. Is there a need for some notification standards in this section of code, or would that just be redundant to what we currently have?
That's something I'd have to look into a little bit further. That's an excellent question. I want to take a look at those notification standards. Something else I do want to mention, however, is that again, because small cell facilities are a use by right in Colorado, resident notification, as great as transparency is, the provider still gets to deploy that site for the most part.
Right.
And so that notification, we don't want that to become an issue for the city.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions from council? Ms. McCroskey, I have one question. You mentioned that this is a draft version. When do we expect to hear like a final version of this after you have discussions with staff?
That's, Tamara may be able to answer that better than I can, but we really want to get some of, there are a few questions in here that I think we're gonna need to talk to Public Works about, maybe risk management as well, really staff members, and see what they say about some of these things before the end of the year. And if that changes, we'll absolutely let you know.
Sounds great. I think there is another question. Member Wink.
Yeah, I was asking the same thing, Mayor Sierra, and I'm just curious about how I always want to support best, right? Our citizens, while we, share these policy decisions that are, really offering some pretty tight parameters around what they can do, when, and how. And so I don't know if it's a question you can answer on the spot, but there's so many citizens that come up and ask questions and have concerns, real concerns. Obviously, the law is as is. I just don't know what else we can do as a city to move forward and strike a happy medium. I mean, we've asked you questions in the past between when you presented previously and now. I mean,
And again, unfortunately,
It
when
feels
it
like a
comes
hard
when it
line,
comes to
right?
that type of infrastructure, local government's hands are kind of tied. And that is what the state has decided, that is what the federal government has decided, and I don't like it any more than you do, candidly.
Yeah.
Towers, again, those bigger pieces of infrastructure, we're gonna put those under conditional use, make that a little bit more difficult, but under that Colorado state law, small cell facilities are a use by right.
right, good. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
Member Noonan.
I'll just tack on to Member Wink's point, which I think is a good one, about what else can we be doing to help inform our citizens about the situation and what they maybe can expect in the city. I think information is a great way to get ahead of some of the concerns that I think are out there and that are valid. And so this is maybe more direction for staff, but when this does come back and if it passes and we do have clearer standards around design, that we would partner that with some public information. We had some great examples from other municipalities the last study session around a page on the website saying this is what the city can regulate, this is what they can't here, or maybe pictures, examples of what it could look like based on what we're regulating in the city. I'd like to see some of that citizen education as part of this if and when it passes.
Any other questions from council? Member Wink, do you have anything else?
I don't. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, Ms. McCroskey, thank you very much for your presentations tonight. Very informative first draft, and really appreciate your work on this.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Moving on to agenda item 5, the historical preservation study by Opinion Environmental. We have Eric Sampson and Sean Fallon from Opinion Environmental here to discuss an overview of the historic preservation survey. Mr. Sampson, good evening.
Good evening.
Who was kick us off tonight?
Sure. Just briefly, I would like to introduce Sean Fallon with Opinion Environmental. He is one of the ones who helped work on the historic survey of the city. And so he's here to present the findings of that and talk about next steps. So without any further ado.
Thank you. Mr. Fallon, good evening.
Good evening, Council. Excuse me. So we should have a presentation. Perfect. So I'd like to show this slide here. So again, my name's Sean Fallon. I'm with Pinion Environmental. We're an environmental consulting firm. And we were hired to help the Historic Preservation Commission put together the historic survey plan for the city of Inglewood. This map here depicts all of the demolished historic or potentially historic resources that are located within the city of Inglewood. So as you can see, there's a number of resources here, and they're gone now. And that was sort of the impetus for this project. The increased development pressure is a great risk to historic resources, not just in Inglewood, throughout Colorado, especially along the Front Range. So the purpose of this plan was to not only identify those resources that exist in this community, but also outline some potential steps that we can take to further the historic preservation goals of the community. Really quickly, this presentation is just going to cover the goals that the Historic Preservation Commission has put together for themselves. I also would like to talk a little bit, just generally speaking, about what a historic survey is and kind of the components of that. Talk about the purpose of this project and some general acknowledgements, and then also talk about the actual components of the project itself, which consisted of a public outreach and engagement, an actual reconnaissance survey that was conducted, some archival research, and then identifying future survey priorities. So as I mentioned, when a Historic Preservation Commission is organized, it is incumbent on them to set out some goals, objectives, kind of their guiding focus. So the Historic Preservation Commission for Inglewood has set these 5 goals out, basically to promote and encourage voluntary participation, designating and preserving, protecting, enhancing, perpetuating those structures, sites, and districts which offer exceptional cultural value to the city. They would like to foster civic engagement with that process, to also promote and encourage the use of these historic resources in the community for the betterment of the community for public welfare and education, to encourage the continued engagement of private ownership of these resources and furthering the private owner preservation goals, and then to also promote historic preservation to the commission and identify what steps they can take to forward the preservation goals of the community. So broadly speaking, what's a historic survey? It's kind of a broad statement. I mean, really, it comes in a variety of flavors, but generally speaking, when we talk about a historic survey in Colorado, the 2 flavors are kind of a reconnaissance level survey and a intensive level survey, and they both have their purposes. In a reconnaissance level survey, the purpose is to cast a wide net to kind of identify those areas that have a higher concentration of resources that meet that 50-year threshold for evaluation, and to also identify those geographic areas that may have a collection of architecturally cohesive resources or resources that were built within the same time frame and may relate to a specific historic theme. And then the next step then is to evaluate those resources in the instance of an intensive level survey, you're trying to evaluate individual resources for National Register of Eligibility, National Register of Historic Places eligibility, which, as you can imagine, is a pretty intensive level process, usually has a small focus, a handful of resources, and the purpose is to identify what resources in the community are eligible for listing with the National Register of Historic Places. And then once those have been identified, to identify ways they can be used and preserved. What we did for this was a reconnaissance survey, which, as I mentioned, casts a wide net. The purpose is to identify or locate those resources that would be eligible or a good candidate, essentially, for those intensive level surveys. So the purpose of this project, like I said, was to guide and prioritize those the historic preservation efforts that are being undertaken by the Historic Preservation Commission. And the purpose of the Reconnaissance Survey, like I said, was to identify both those rare and common resource types that exist throughout the community, place them geographically and temporally, and then to provide recommendations for future survey. So this project was funded by a grant through the State Historic Fund. So big thank you to History Colorado for that ability. And then also would like to acknowledge the Historic Preservation Commission for really being the driving force behind this project. The Historic Preservation consists of Lauren Cooper, C.J. Cullinan, Matthew Crabtree, Melinda Ellswick, Cash Parker, Jason O'Brien, Mary Miles, Shelley Warwick, Eric Sampson, and Dave Cuesta, and then Cheryl Wink is the HPC liaison. So yeah, big thanks to these folks for being the kind of the driving force behind this. So there were kind of two components to this project. There's the actual survey that we completed with the recommendations, and there was also a public outreach component. Every project that's funded through a grant by History Colorado has a component of public outreach that can take a lot of different forms. For this, we had a really engaged council that wanted to really see what the community had to say and get a sense of what the preservation goals of the residents of Inglewood was. So that took the form of an online survey that ran from June to October of 21, basically asking general questions, trying to identify those priorities of the community. And then in addition, there's two annual community events. So staff from the Department of Community Development had booths set up at each of these events to actually engage with the community, to kind of field questions, get a sense of where the priorities were, to get a sense of any kind of concerns, and that sort of thing. So here's just a quick summary of results from the online survey. There was 138 total participants, which, believe it or not, is actually pretty good for this type of survey. A vast majority of the respondents were not only residents of Inglewood, but also homeowners. Excuse me, I got something stuck in my throat tonight. And one of the broad questions we asked was like, what is your favorite outcome? What do you like to see from a historic preservation project? And overwhelming, or why kind of is historic preservation important to you? And overwhelmingly, people identified this theme of there being this place building. It helps create a sense of community. So that was really, as you can see, the overwhelming choice. The word cloud there represents the larger the word, the more frequently it appeared in the responses. The question was asking what sites you identify with, what are those historic sites that you see in Inglewood. So you can see Broadway comes up, we have City Ditch, the Gothic Theater, Key Bank, et cetera, et cetera. These are not necessarily what we would consider a historic resource, but this is what the community is seeing as a historic resource. So we asked respondents what historic themes did they best feel represents the history of Inglewood, and overwhelmingly folks said it was downtown development and the streetcar system, closely followed by homesteading and then post-World War II development. Again, when asked what types of sites were important to preserve in the city of Inglewood, the historic districts and subdivisions were the #1 choice. Public buildings came in as a close second, as well as the residential and commercial structures that exist throughout the city. And then when asked what types of preservation initiatives best reflect the community's needs, again, the emphasis really focused on identifying and evaluating potential historic districts. So in addition to this public outreach component, we actually did conduct a reconnaissance survey, which was a kind of a layered process. We looked at not only data that exists already with the state of Colorado through the Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, but we also pulled in the assessor data from the Arapahoe County and layered in all of the year-built information for every building, essentially, in Inglewood, constructed before 1975. And then also looked at what archival research we could do, so looking at topographic maps and that sort of thing. And then also, once we had all of that information kind of layered together, we selected at random, sort of at random, it was an informed guess on what resources we wanted to prioritize for the Reconnaissance Survey. So we chose 128 properties. They kind of represented a wide range of building dates, resource types, kind of general thematic areas, and went out and field verified them. So we had 2 historians over the course of 2 days physically walk around the city, taking photographs, and kind of doing a field assessment, if you will, of their historic integrity and potential areas of historic significance. And everything got compiled onto this really robust reconnaissance table, and every resource that we evaluated was not only assigned a theme, but also given a priority ranking for what resources should be prioritized for that intensive historic evaluation that I was previously discussing. And so this is kind of a little bit of insight into that process. So the next series of slides, you'll see the year built information that we layered in to kind of build our survey out. And it's kind of a cool visual representation of the city and as it developed. So you can see this is everything constructed prior to 1910, going back to the 1860s. And as you progress through, you can see that development kind of explodes in the 1910s, really focused along that Broadway corridor. And then you can really see another big boom in development starting in the 1920s, and a real city center kind of developing. In the 1930s, all of that kind of historic infill along that Broadway corridor starts to fill in, but there is a little bit of a lull with the outbreak of World War II. Carries into the 40s, but by 1945, that post-war boom is back, and you can really see, especially on the south side of the city, the development of some of these really cohesive subdivisions. And that is kind of the trend through the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And you can really see these subdivisions start to fill out the city. So again, like I mentioned, to kind of further inform our recommendations, we did a little bit of archival research as much as we could, looking at GLO records, Sanborn maps, looking at census records, pretty much everything we could get our hands on to help us prioritize those resources that we would want to recommend for greater evaluation. So all of this was culminated into a series of recommendations that we put together, basically saying what we think the priority should be for future surveys. And those were kind of slated into these broad themes that are kind of geographic and also temporal. So we've got Inglewood in the 19th century, the Broadway corridor in the pre-war city, agricultural vestiges, subdivisions and post-war growth, educational facilities, industrial influence, and then underrepresented history. And then each of these themes was also assigned a priority ranking for what should come first in terms of survey. Those rankings being immediate, so those resources having the greatest risk to them, whether that be development pressure or condition, high, and then medium. And that's to allow for some flexibility, because it's tough to say where development's going to settle in the future, where those pressures are coming from. So we didn't really want to put a box around what those survey recommendations were. So just, real quickly, of the one recommendation we had that was kind of an immediate recommendation was for the 19th century survey, basically, of these handful of pre-1910 resources, essentially. There's 6 or less that exist in the community, one of which being the Thomas Garrett House, very important and significant resource to the community. And again, based on the kind of the rarity of how frequently they appear in the historic record resources of this age, definitely recommend prioritizing these. And then again, we mentioned that we identified a potential historic district with a core kind of centering on that intersection of Hamden and South Broadway. And then kind of in line with what the community was recommending, Inglewood has a surprising number of post-war subdivisions that maintain the kind of that mid-century architecture. So there's a lot of potential for potential historic districts within these residential communities, which is really cool. And a lot of really kind of exciting architecture if you're into the mid-century stuff. And then, of course, the underrepresented histories. So very often, the minority community is not readily available in the historic record. But there is some things you can do to piece that together a little bit. So you can take you can look at census records, pair that with our Sanborn maps and business directories and city directories, and then pretty soon you can start to layer in and get an idea of where these underrepresented communities exist. And kind of their trends throughout the neighborhoods as well. And yeah, with that, would love to take any questions, discuss next steps.
Thank you, Mr. Fallon, for the presentation. Any questions from council? Member Noonekamp.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate the work that has gone into this, both from the Citizen Commission and as well as from you and your firm. The report was fascinating to read, including so much of the history of the community, some new characters in our story that were fun to learn more about. And I think this is a really helpful foundation, and so I appreciate all the work and the collaborative effort that has gone into even procuring the funding for this. I am curious, are there recommendations for next steps? Obviously, there's some areas of emphasis that have been highlighted. There's the idea of a historic district, but is there anything that you would recommend from a policy perspective?
My personal recommendation is to always emphasize those resources that have the greatest and most immediate risk to them. So in my estimation, efforts should be focused on those handful of older resources that kind of fit that early 19th century. Again, because there's so few of them, there's probably a greater likelihood for them being listed on the National Register. So in terms of like seeing through a successful nomination or successful survey project, I think that is a place to start for sure. But like I said, our whole report, as you saw, summarized a whole list of options and opportunities to kind of forward some of these historic preservation goals. So really it's, at the discretion of the Historic Preservation Commission, what the community desires, much more so than my personal recommendation.
Any other questions for council? Member Russell.
So I do have a question. I actually enjoyed looking through this as well. There were 4 churches in there. One of them I went to when I was a little girl. It's no longer there. So why did those things get included in the survey?
Why did the churches, were they included?
Yeah, why specifically those 4 churches? It was in a specific area. It was like down in the Sherman, Logan, down in the 3,500 block.
Yeah, so, resources were chosen kind of, the intent was to try and capture a diversity of resource types. So because there was only a handful of church buildings, we felt it important to include as many as we could, kind of the same with education buildings. So that was that was really the impetus for including them. It may seem awkward because obviously the bulk of resources are residential, but definitely wanted to make sure that we were trying to capture, like I said, that variety of resource types.
Right. Well, and the truth is they did play a huge history in the city.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, those are like the original community centers.
All right. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
The one thing that caught my eye right away was the inclusion of the dairy, 1325 West Oxford. And this structure strikes me as something that is only useful for what it's being used for right now. So in the event that it no longer meets the business needs of the dairy, what happens then? Do we
Great
come
question.
in and say, hey, it's always going to be a dairy because it always has been?
No, absolutely not. So historic function is only one component that kind of factors into the when you're considering the historicity of a resource. I don't know if I just made that up. So it losing, say that the dairy moved out, that losing that association certainly would work against its integrity, but it is by no means saying that resource is put into that box and could only be used for those purposes. So me personally, I'm a big fan of adaptive reuse of historic structures. So anytime that you can take a historic structure and, you know, an old business moves out, but if there's a way to move a new business in there that can utilize the existing facility, there's a lot of really successful examples of restaurants moving into old industrial spaces, breweries especially, is really popular right now. But I highly encourage the adaptive reuse of these spaces, and very often that is a process that falls in line with the greater historic preservation goal. So those things can work in unison.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Member Anderson.
I had a question on the table, kind of looking through this table of properties here. What is it? What is the individual priority? What does that ranking mean? High, medium, or low?
Okay. Yeah. So, like I said, and I kind of went over it pretty quickly, but so there's this overarching the National Register of Historic Places. What is basically like the country's database of historic assets. So when we say when we're prioritizing individual resources for evaluation, we want to see which of those resources meet the criteria that the National Park Service has identified for listing or becoming eligible for listing on that National Register. And then once a resource is listed, it opens up opportunities for tax credits or greater protections, that sort of thing. So when we identified those individual resources on the reconnaissance table, the ones with like a high priority or a high ranking are those that we've identified as having the highest likelihood of meeting that individual eligibility for listing on the National Register.
Got it. Okay, so that has to do with the National Register. I was just curious because I saw that I think the Scarrett House is rated low on that, so there's something about the house that doesn't meet national standards for history.
So again, and our recommendations are based off of that field evaluation. Yeah. So looking at primarily architectural style and like the physical condition of the structure, and it's also been a resource that is well documented. So for those reasons, it's not necessarily a high priority.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I guess I do have a question, Mr. Fallon, and I think this question actually might be for staff, just in terms of what are the next steps if we do say as a council that we want to, leverage these survey results and take a look at the 19th century buildings, South Broadway, some of the neighborhoods. What does that mean from the city perspective, or what is it? What type of direction is it that you're looking from our perspective?
Don't want to speak on behalf of you guys.
And Chair Crabtree, if you want to.
So really the next steps is part of the Code Next process. We're going to be rewriting the Historic Preservation Commission section of Title 16. And what that will establish is a mechanism for property owners to submit applications to have their properties reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission, who will ultimately make a decision to City Council. And then you guys would make a decision, the ultimate decision on whether to grant some sort of historic landmark status to the property. So it's kind of in the pipeline now. We hope to be able to accept applications and be ready to go as soon as the Code Next revisions have been given the green light. And so that's kind of one aspect of next steps there.
Sure, and I'll jump in here and say that the commission has spent a considerable amount of time and through multiple city attorneys, working through kind of a commonality of code recommendations that could be inserted into Code Next, into the Title 16, that would be appropriate to historic designation within the city. And I believe Sean had mentioned at the very beginning, there's a map that we've been keeping track of a lot of the demolitions in the city. There's a lot of attention on areas in the city, and there's a lot of homes that, are going for redevelopment. Commonly talk with folks, and they say, I need to sell my home, but I sure wish it wouldn't go to a developer. And right now, there isn't much control over that. Whereas if there is a historic designation that's set to the property ahead of sale, it's not a surprise for who buys it, but it's buying into the community at a different different point, different scale, different kind of part of the community. Instead of coming in as a developer at that point and tearing down a structure that has existed for generations, well, they're preserving something and continuing to live in something that is really part of the fabric of the community. A lot of people want this. Now, Councilmember Russell, you had mentioned churches. Well, Inglewood Bible Church is now just recently closed. That's a big lot of land. Developers are going to be drooling over that. The current owners of the church would like to seek historic designation on that property. There is no avenue to do so right now. So I think the next step is to acknowledge that there's a large percentage of the community that are concerned on how quickly our neighborhoods are changing, how much development is occurring in the city, and how much they would like to preserve portions of the city. And as also stated in the survey portion of this, first of all, I mean, amazing results from the community and 138 people. Well, you look at that, that's not a lot of the city, but factoring in, I guess, from talking with Ashley beforehand, that's a significant increase over other times that the survey has been done. So there's a lot of attention in this community right now for preservation efforts, and also preserving certain areas within the city. So the Inglewood downtown area, obviously the Downtown Development Authority I've talked with them on various topics, and they're very interested in preservation efforts in that area, and so are a lot of the business owners. And I think that's actually the heart of the city. I mean, that's really the core of Inglewood right there. We need to do everything we can to preserve that. You have areas like Arapahoe Acres. You have areas, a lot of the early 1900s, 1920s bungalows. Some of them may have actually been Sears kit homes. There's a lot of history in this community, and a lot of character that I guess is being demolished on a daily basis. So, next step, historic designation, my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Crabtree. Member Russell.
Thank you. So, just a couple of questions, going back to the churches. So would that provide some protection from churches if they get historical designation?
Well, looking back and thinking back to the work that we did with the code, there'd be a plaque. There would be a recognition from both the community development standpoint and from a building department standpoint that the property would be recognized as historic. Does it mean it can't be torn down? Does it mean it can't be changed? Well, the code recommendations that we made were not heavily restrictive, right? There's still the opportunity to live in the structure as intended, as a house, or operate the structure as intended, and make changes that were necessary. But the demolition, that creates a little bit more of a process necessary there, at least a review, which doesn't exist now, right? So how the process would effectively work, a demolition permit is submitted for a property that's historically designated. That would then go to the Historic Preservation Commission, or the Planning and Zoning. I believe that's still a little bit up in the air with that, but likely the Historic Preservation Commission, to review the application and see if this is something that would damage the community if it was lost. You look at this and say that, well, a lot of homes are getting lost in Arapahoe Acres. A lot of the community in that area would support the fact of preserving homes that exist in the character that they have now. Or if there is we did just recently lose a historic home over just on the other side of, just right across the street, right across Hampton from here. There was a home that was built in the early 1900s that was part of the original flowers and greenhouses there. That was a beautiful home. It was just in a bad spot, but could have been adaptively reused. There could have been a lot of opportunities, I think, that could have done with that. But anyway, it creates a process to inspect, basically, demolitions.
Okay, thank you. And then just one other question about these individual homes. I see one on here. I know the person that lives in this house. It's high, and it was built in 1898. Are these already on the historic record, or we've just identified these as potential historic homes in Inglewood?
So the benefit with this survey is that we were able to go through and take a large snapshot of the city as what it looks like from an age perspective, right? I mean, that's the basic criteria of an understanding historic importance is the age of the property and any kind of architectural features that exist. Not many houses were built before 1900 that still exist. There were a lot of homes that were built before 1900 that have been torn down over the course of the last 5 to 7 years. As this development increases happen. But not many homes, if you look on that list, 1898, 1890, I think there might be one just a little bit earlier than that, but there's just a few, and there's not many left. I don't want to go too much detail into the benefits of living in an old house. I live in an old house. I love it. The floors creak. That's amazing for me, but there's also other benefits too, that these homes have stood the test of time. They're built with real lumber. There's no press board, there's no glue, it's built with real materials. And the quality of these homes are being replaced with structures that are built with plywood and glue board and things along those lines. And so it's a shame to see homes like you mentioned being demolished.
Right, and I'm gonna call this person because they probably don't even know their home is on here. They probably know that it's that old.
A lot of people don't know the age of their home either, and that's another nice thing about this process. This helps to educate the community on the age of homes and the importance, and also the development period in time that how the city kind of grew. It's good to document it.
Right, thank you.
Any further questions from council? Mr. Sampson, is there anything else that you need from us? It does sound like Code Next is going to be the next step, but anything else you need from us tonight?
No, I think the only other thing would be possibly for council to determine what you would like to do, if there would be a formal adoption process for the historical reconnaissance survey from Pinion. But really then next steps go to Code Next.
Okay. Sounds good. Is that something that you want us to discuss tonight in terms of formal adoption, or is that something that would be next step as well?
I will defer that back to you.
Mayor, we can bring this back to you or put it on a future agenda for adoption. I think there are some things that we can do to strengthen this a bit in terms of some of the recommendations. I noticed a missing map, if you will, of the areas that are recommended for districts and sites. I think a map would be helpful, but if you want, we can just make some final tweaks to that and then bring it back to you for a future agenda.
That sounds good, City Manager. See no objections to that. So Mr. Fallon, Mr. Sampson, Mr. Crabtree, thanks for taking part in this presentation tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And up next, we have Director of Development Brad Power, Economic Development Manager Darren Hollingsworth, and we have a few guests tonight. Mr. Hollingsworth, I'll let you kick it off.
Good evening, Your Honor, and members of City Council. I'm pleased to welcome back Mr. Brian Duffany to City Council this evening. He'll be presenting the draft Strategic Economic Development Plan to City Council. This, in the context of a post-COVID economic environment, it became apparent that this is the right time to take a look at doing an economic development strategic plan for the city and help us to find new opportunities, as well as understand how best to meet the needs of a changing economy. We received a great deal of feedback from across the community, from businesses and residents alike. Inglewood has a very solid economic development program, and the recommendations in the plan present some exciting opportunities for the community. We're pleased to present these strategies and look forward to receiving feedback and direction from City Council this evening. Thank you, Your Honor. Brian?
Thanks, Darren.
Let's see here. There we go. All right. Thank you. Thanks for having us back. This was a really enjoyable project to work on with the community. I am going to try to cover a lot in about 15 minutes. I'll do my best. I'm going to talk to you about the process that we went through in forming this, the recommendations in the plan. About the current economic development structure in Inglewood, who does what basically, and then we'll go into the different strategy recommendation areas, and then have some time for questions and discussion. So, We started this off last spring. We were working with a steering committee comprised of Key City staff. So that's Darren, Mr. Brad Power, Dan Paremba, and then the EDDA, Hillary Portel, and the Greater Inglewood Chamber. So Lindsay Runyon and David Carroll, and then another key partner is the Aurora South Metro SBDC, Marsha McGilly. So that was kind of our core working group. We did some focus groups and workshops, and got a lot of input from business owners and business managers in those. We've done interviews with several major employers, namely the hospitals, and some key property owners and real estate brokers. And then a community survey was done on the Inglewood Engage site. Am I getting a little bit of feedback, or am I okay? You're okay. Back up. Yeah, okay, I'll roll with it. Got about 45 surveys back from the general public on that. So pretty extensive community input. So what is economic development? It is, simply put, it's a set of policies and strategies and actions that are designed to grow and sustain an economy. There are a lot of different ways that communities approach economic development. There's no one right way. You have to do what makes sense in your local context and with the resources that you have. It's also about pathways to wealth building, helping ensure that all people have access to the same resources and opportunities. It's sustaining and growing the local government tax base, because infrastructure is important. Infrastructure and placemaking and government services are important to having a nice city. Business support and retention, so a lot of focus on retaining and supporting existing businesses. Quality of life and quality of place. This is something we're gonna come back to several times in this. And then there's still room for recruitment and marketing, but we believe in a small city like Inglewood, it has to be balanced with the other aspects of economic development, because we don't have a gigantic war chest to play the incentives battles and be sending people to marketing conferences and trying to hook the next big employer to come here. It's a different set of strategies for Inglewood. So this is the current structure. It's a city-led model with some really key partners. So the EDDA, their purview is the downtown plan, a lot of infrastructure, clean and safe office operations, and then helping to implement the city center redevelopment. And then the Chamber of Commerce, Greater Inglewood Chamber of Commerce. They are a liaison between businesses and the city. They're really good at communication, really good at sharing ideas and networking across their membership, and promoting Inglewood businesses. And then in the middle of that is the City of Inglewood, the Economic Development Office, Redevelopment Office, all within community development. And they're in the middle, doing business retention and expansion programs, running grant programs. But one of the most important functions they do is sort of hard to put a hard concrete handle on, is the city is at the middle of all this, convening and coordinating all the activities of the partners. And they are also very hands-on with small business support and retention. The other key partner not shown in this graphic, the city has about 11 other economic partners. The Aurora South Metro SBDC is another really key partner with the city. And we looked around the region at different economic development models, and this is a very common model, to have a city-led structure supported by some type of downtown or redevelopment type organization and a chamber of commerce. And we didn't see any need for the city to alter this structure that's in place. We think it's working well, and we heard that as well from our stakeholders. All right, I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit here. So trying to summarize all of our stakeholder input. Strengths. One thing we kept hearing was that the city's growing again, and businesses were really excited about that. When you're growing population, you're bringing more money into the community, and that helps support the local downtown businesses or businesses throughout the city. South Broadway and Old Hampton core is thriving. People think that's doing really well. Another thing we heard repeatedly, it's a small city. It's big enough that it's a good place to own a business, but it's small enough that you feel like you can be part of a community and have an impact. Central location, really good access to customers, really good transportation access. Right now, lower cost real estate compared to Denver, so that's a little bit of a competitive advantage for people trying to get established. And we also heard, and I'm not rubber stamping anything, I work with a lot of municipalities and a lot of counties. We heard that the city is a good partner, easy to work with, accessible, not a lot of bureaucracy. And I think that's a really good thing to hear. On the challenges, other areas of South Broadway need investment. We heard that a lot, especially from businesses south of Hampden. As you see probably every day when you come in to City Hall, a lot of vacancies still on Inglewood Parkway. We'll talk about some creative ideas for that. Mobility and safety for all modes of transportation and all abilities. So these are all placemaking type issues, right? And it just highlights the importance of that in the city's economic development strategy. Then on the business support, more support for permitting private events, things like food trucks, and some additional support and awareness of the different lending and grant programs that are available either through the city or through some of its partners. Opportunities, again, the city's growing, and in a largely built-out community like Inglewood, my personal opinion is that it is important to recognize the importance of infill and redevelopment, because if it's difficult to grow your economy and difficult to evolve as the economy changes if you're not providing for some opportunity to grow strategically, and so projects like City Center and other significant infill and redevelopment projects are important for that. So other opportunities, City Center, people think that's an important project to complete. I understand there was some changes in status with the developer recently, but it's a big project. They often do take time to come to fruition. Placemaking investments. The old Hampden Complete Streets project is going to happen pretty soon. That's going to reconstruct that into a safer, more aesthetically pleasing multimodal corridor. The EDDA is getting started. They'll be doing more clean and safe in the downtown. So these are all really good opportunities and really good momentum that the city has. Wellness district is really strong and poised to grow even more. I think there are about 1,000 housing units planned in that area, so that's additional growth that will support local businesses. Large and stable employers. Really important to recognize the value of the two major hospitals here. You've got a great food and beverage cluster that's strengthening. I think a couple of the restaurants have kind of received some national press recently, which is fantastic. Unique local retailers. And then we also heard a lot about home-based businesses and professionals that are growing, and how do we kind of keep them and provide a place for them keep them in Inglewood as they grow. So getting into the strategies. And I think a lot of this is a little bit of a message of keep doing what you're doing. A strategic plan sort of looks at which direction are we going, and you're going this way, and we don't think you need to go that way. We think you're generally going in the right direction. It's just some modifications and some a little bit of adjustment to some of the current programs. So on business growth, attraction, and retention, there's more detail in the document about this. So I'm just kind of hitting the major topic areas. Supporting private events. I think the city's interested in streamlining or modifying the permitting process around those. The chamber may have an opportunity to help support more business-to-business marketing. So that's kind of people selling each other's stuff in their stores. So there's more exposure and everyone benefits from that. The chamber continue running the networking programs that they run and the different training and event programs that they do. They're good at it and people enjoy it. Providing for or trying to attract more co-working and low-cost office space, or making use of some of the older buildings that we have in the community, so that small businesses, sole proprietors have a place to grow in Inglewood. That came up a lot, and there are a number of opportunities in the community to do that. Leveraging the hospitals and the wellness district. So a couple ideas we talked about is trying to connect some of the local businesses with the supply chain or procurement departments within the hospitals to kind of capture more of that economic development in the community. And so that could be part of ongoing outreach with the hospitals. And then sites for major employers. So, you know, the residential market is generally strong, and if I was a developer, I'm trying to manage risk, I'm gonna wanna come into a project and do a bunch of housing and get out. But we shouldn't lose sight of the need for economic diversity, because, you know, a lot of Inglewood's employment is smaller retail, food and beverage type businesses. There is a fair amount of industrial on the west side, but we should be keeping our eye on the ball for continued economic diversity. So, you know, for sites where it works and where it's appropriate, trying to preserve some land for larger employers. Business support and funding. The city's grant programs are popular. We talked about broadening a few of the eligible costs to include things like fire suppression, maybe some energy efficiency grants to get more widespread use of those. A little bit of need for some lender education on the different tools and resources that are out there. So the SBDC talked about trying to do a lender forum every year to get all the major lenders in the community together and promote the different tools and get them a little more familiar with what's available and to help market those programs. Within that, increasing outreach on the grant and loan programs that are available, especially microfinance, trying to target historically underrepresented communities to get more lending in those communities. And then there are businesses that incorporate Inglewood within their own advertising and marketing, excuse me. And so thinking about a grant program that might help support them. So we're sort of leveraging the private sector's efforts to market the community. Okay, on to placemaking. So I think placemaking is especially important for small cities, excuse me. You know, nice places attract investment, they attract entrepreneurs. You know, people and businesses that can sort of choose where they want to go are going to choose a nice place. And we heard a lot about that in the outreach. And I think it's all good, because it is again, it's continue doing what you're doing. A big focus of the EDDA's work is to create a safe, inclusive place for businesses, workers, and visitors. And they're just getting started. So there's a lot of opportunity there to address the placemaking aspects. Repeating myself a bit, South Broadway, south of Hamden, there might be a branding opportunity there to call it SOHA. It's a term I heard years ago. But you know, there's desire to have more investment down south of Hamden to try to, as the historic preservation presentation showed you, a lot of that is post-war development, right? So you've got larger parking lots, larger setbacks, older commercial buildings that aren't creating the same kind of vibrancy that the historic downtown core creates. Higher vehicle speeds, a lot of things like that. So there's a corridor study starting that I think the city's going to get plugged in on too. That's going to be a big opportunity there. Housing growth. You know, it helps expand the customer base. It also helps expand the labor force for businesses. We'll come back to that in a second. Another idea is this category of actions called tactical urbanism. It's a little bit of a buzzword these days, but it can have some good results. So things like food trucks, pop-up retail, temporary improvements, so temporary bike lanes, art. Another thing called guerrilla gardening, I thought was kind of cool. It's, you know, if there's a kind of a dead green space or something that's not really used, create a community garden. You just have to be clear if you're doing these things that they're temporary, because, you know, when you provide an amenity to the public and then take it away, there can be some challenges there. So, and related to that, along Inglewood Parkway, we talked quite a bit with the EDDA about some creative ideas that they're thinking about and working on now to try to address some of the vacant space. So I think they're considering partnering with some artist groups to get some art functions in those spaces. It could also be a good place for co-working space, small office space, possibly a business incubator. A business incubator is a little bit of a step up because it requires staff and money to run it, right? Because it's not just office space. It's also business mentoring programs. Denver did a really cool grant, is working on a really cool grant program, Pop-Up Denver. It's competitive. They get the awards, you get very, very reduced rent and some startup cash. They're trying to use that downtown on 16th Street Mall. Workforce. This is a short one. Workforce is a really big kind of macro issue, right? It's mainly addressed at the state level and the regional level through the different educational partnerships and the workforce development centers. So where does the city plug in? I think a key area is housing, housing diversity and affordability. It's especially important when people are commuting for lower wage jobs. If you're commuting past the similar job with similar pay every day, you're pretty soon going to say, why am I doing this? I'm just going to work closer to my house. But so the more that cities can provide housing close to their jobs at all ranges of income, affordable to all ranges of income, the more competitive they can be in the labor market. And I understand you have a housing needs assessment or a housing strategy underway right now. I'm quite certain that will address some of these housing topics as well. And then the city just really is already doing a lot of this. It's continuing its relationship with 80 Works. They do partner with a lot of job fairs. 80 Works has other programs that are available to employers, and so that's part of the city's job is just being that convener and making those connections. The last one, diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. This is by no means comprehensive. So this is a little bit of a new area in the economic development strategy. So we heard some input in our workshops about trying to get more representation from people of color and other historically underserved people. The idea that the business ownership and economic development leadership should better represent the makeup of the community. And Inglewood's fairly diverse. If I remember the stats in our report compared to some of its neighbors, if I remember the stats in our report was something like 30% non-white. So trying to increase the representation from other people in economic development. And so that's something new in here definitely. And that's working with the existing partners to try to identify new leaders that would be interested in taking and getting involved in a meaningful way. And then trying to find some new partners to work with. There are some really large regional groups, just to name a couple of them, the African Chamber of Commerce, the Colorado Black Chamber of Commerce, the Denver Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. These are big regional organizations with a lot of members. There may be a way for the city to engage with them or others on that topic. And that's all I have. I'm happy to take questions, thoughts, comments.
Thank you, Mr. Duffany, for the presentation. Member Wing, kick us off.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you so much for this informative presentation. Thanks for being brief.
Thank you.
Fast.
I tried.
Speedy. I'm going to grab some low-hanging fruit right at the end. Really easy. Just a note of, I think, maybe encouragement for future. And I say that with gratitude for what you're doing so far. You said 30% of our citizenship is non-white.
If I remember correctly from the report.
You're right.
Sure.
Approximations. I mean, these numbers are hard to pin down, and I get that, and I'm not challenging that.
Yep.
But I really, really, really want to, especially as a Black person, I really want to ask that when we talk about DEI, we're not just talking about ethnicity or skin color, right?
Okay.
There's just so much. As a Black person, I get it, right? I suffer a lot, but let's, if you can, and if I can help in any way, but let's broaden the DEI conversation to include the multitude of groups that are disadvantaged,
Absolutely.
that are minority groups, that are looked down on and treated just as nastily as myself as a Black person, right?
Thank you.
That's all. Yeah.
No,
Thank you.
It's
Thanks. I say that with kindness.
Well, and
Yeah.
I'm very appreciative.
All right,
'cause
great,
it's,
thank you.
It's a hard topic for me to navigate. So
Member Woodward.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation, and I spent a lot of time reading this. It was really good. I really like it. And one of the small things that I saw, or it isn't a small thing, I guess, the food truck issue. I've heard numerous times that food trucks plan on coming, and then once they get to the permitting stage or whatever they have to do, it's so difficult that they don't bother coming. And especially, and I heard this a couple times, compared to Littleton. And I don't know what would be different between Inglewood and Littleton, but I would suggest we look into that, what Littleton does, that makes it easier for food trucks to come there than here. I know it isn't Tri-County because we are both been with Tri-County. Some of the other things that I noticed were the tactical urbanism, which, I think that's happening certainly in Denver, in numerous places. And, Director Power may remember when we were doing urban renewal and looking at the project on Acoma, and we were talking about utilizing that alley for basically temporary tactical urbanism with seating outside for restaurants, that sort of thing. And right now, with what we have down there, with the restaurants in the summer, some of that stuff during the evening hours and stuff could be utilized and let those restaurants expand into space like that. I also noted, and I think it was, I think the number was 30% on non-white, Hispanic and Latino. And I thought, wow, I never realized that number was that large, and what an opportunity to start going after and, finding these entrepreneurs and stuff and engaging and getting some of these other chambers to work with us to get those people here. So this is just so informative. To really get it all, I think I've got to go through this a few times, but I'm really pleased with this report.
Thank you.
What has come out of it. The median income household of the cities, Inglewood is the lowest, which was interesting to me, looking at some of the others, it's right behind Wheat Ridge by, less than $800 or something per year. But I've said in the past that Wheat Ridge is really a good comp for us because it's that same thing. It's approximately the same size as Inglewood, and it's a first-tier suburb. So it's bordered by Denver, just like Inglewood, and it's very similar, and I think I don't think it's completely landlocked yet, but
Pretty close.
But there's a lot of points in here that I think at some point I'd like to sit down with Darren and just say, wow, what can we do here? A lot of ideas.
Data's interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
That's
you,
all.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Anyone else? Member Anderson?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I really like the tactical urbanism thing you mentioned, and especially from an economic development perspective, having someplace where where people could set up a little pop-up shop on a regular basis. And I really love what we've done this last year with the market, the market series that we've had with our events that we have going on. That's been great, but something that week after week where where somebody who is just trying to start a business, or when I think of the thinking of diversity, equity, inclusion, the most important group that comes to my mind are the economically disadvantaged, people in poverty, people who are just trying to start, just want to get off the, get going in life and start their first business or something like that. But to have a place where the investment is really, really low, where they can go out and set up a booth or a table or something, and on a regular basis be able to sell products or offer a service or something like that to the community. And I think the technical urbanism kind of thing would be really great. And I'd love to see us work that into some kind of work into this economic development plan, but also our broader strategies our strategic plan as a city as well, is just to say, where can we set that up? Where can we make the space for people to really incubate those small businesses themselves and have those low cost opportunities to lift themselves up a little bit?
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Noonan-Camp.
Thank you for the presentation. This was really great to see how this is turning out, and it's always great to hear that we're doing some good things. We should keep doing some of the great things that we're doing, and no small part of the wonderful staff who are leading this work, but then also the opportunities that we still have available to us. And I had just a couple points of feedback and then a question. But one point of feedback is to Member Wink's point on the DEI, which I'm really thrilled to see this as a component of the strategy and how we're thinking about underserved and underrepresented communities in Inglewood. And I agree with Member Anderson's point as well. Would love to see the Women's Chamber of Commerce included on this list, female-owned businesses, but also like to see veteran-owned businesses. How do we expand that scope a little bit more to think about who are the different kind of groups that we can help amplify in our community, which we have represented here. So I'm excited to see that. I'm also curious on some of how you were talking about how businesses are kind of cross-networking within the community and how they elevating one another. How is our economic development strategy also connected to our workforce development and our homelessness work that we've been doing? We've got great nonprofits in the community like Cross Purpose and Ready to Work and Bridge House. How are we connecting our businesses with those nonprofits as well, so that we're actually creating that talent pipeline? And as Member Anderson spoke about, how are we empowering people to get good jobs in Inglewood and partnering with our local businesses in that? So I'm curious how we can do that. And also excited to see, we've done so many great events in our community, and our city staff has done such a great job. How do we also empower more members of the community, more private businesses to do their own events? So I'm excited to see that. My kind of outstanding question is the Inglewood Parkway vacancies, and I'm excited to see some of what the EDDA has planned about how to revitalize that on kind of a temporary short-term basis, what we can do, especially here in this area. What other strategies have you maybe thought of, or the things that have come out of this research about what we can do? There's, some vacancies, large parking lots. What are the things we can do to revitalize that area to make it feel like a more thriving city center?
Well, some of the tactical urbanism strategies could be effective in those parking lots. That's definitely something to be explored. On the homelessness aspect, that is something the EDDA is working on. If I get the words right, it's the Tri-City Action Plan. So that is definitely on their radar. And I also appreciate all of your comments about broadening the definition and the discussion around DEI. Thank you.
Mr. Duffany, actually, do you mind if I just piggyback on the question by Member Noonan-Camp just before we move to a different topic? But I'm trying to understand this as well in terms of what we could be doing as a city, because you mentioned 16th Street Mall. There's lower rents being offered for any vendors that are going into those spaces. I feel we have something very similar going on within the city center area, where we do have property owners that haven't leased out specific properties. Does the city provide a fund in order to make those low housing and still make the property owners whole? What is going on at 16th Street, or what is Denver doing, or other municipalities doing, in order to bring in some of these, to kind of revitalize those areas that aren't being leased?
Yeah, that Pop-Up Denver program, I'm pretty sure they're using some ARPA funding to do it, and so they've identified a number of property owners that want to participate in the program. I guess there's no real downside for them. The risk is they get their operating expenses paid for a little while. If the business doesn't succeed, their space is vacant again. But the upside is if the business does succeed, they've got a tenant. The space is filled. But they're using COVID recovery money to fund that. And it's competitive. It has to be a new business. And they get free rent. They have to pay utilities, and then they get $20,000 in like startup assistance. So you do need you do need funding and resources to initiate the program. But I think it's really creative.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Member Russell.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I did get a call today, and I've had calls like this in the past, which is a little bit concerning to me. This is a person that bought a property in Inglewood back in, 2019, had been looking since 2017, got the rules keep changing. And so to date, the business still hasn't taken off. And the person talked to me is the rules keep changing. Do we have anything anywhere that will help people know what they're getting into when they buy a property so the costs don't go exponential, and then the parking keeps changing, and so they had enough parking and now they don't? And I mean, that is a little frustrating for businesses when they come in here. And if we're not set up to help them get going, what are we gonna do to fix that problem?
I'll try and answer that, and then if staff has any comments to add to that.
I do think that would probably be better answered by our Director of Community Development in terms of those strategies. And Member Russell, while Brad is coming up, if you could let us know that business so we can reach out and our Economic Development Manager can do direct outreach, that'd be great.
I will do that. Thank you.
Yeah, that was going to be, good evening, Mayor, members of Council, Brad Power, Director of the Community Development Department. That was going to be part of my answer, was we would like to know who that business is so we could work directly with them. But we are trying to send the message in the community that we are open for business. I think some of the commentary that we had from the business community and the outreach efforts relative to the plan was very positive around our working relationships. One of the other things that we're trying to do is, through our Code Next project, is have our definitions in terms of what the rules say be much more clear than they are now, that our land use code is more user-friendly, not only by our staff, obviously, but by the community, the business community, and anybody who's interested in doing business in Inglewood. So I always look at that as kind of a continuous process of our improvement. I don't like to look at things as being cast in stone. So if we hear specific instances around those types of challenges, we want to hear about them. That's one of the reasons why I do 3 outreach efforts per year with our customers, people who work with us maybe once or twice, people who work with us all the time in our economic development, building, and planning functions. And we have one scheduled for mid-November for our economic development clients. And so we want to reach out directly to the businesses, have them in face-to-face, and have those discussions around what's going well in terms of how we work with them and what ways can we be better. Some of these businesses might have other locations in other cities, and if there's business practices or ways that permitting works in other areas that's more effective from their perspective, we want to hear that so we can take a look at those options as well going forward.
Thank you very much, and I will get that information to you.
Thank you.
And Mayor Pro Tem.
We talk sometimes up here about the carrot and the stick. And when it comes to vacant retail space, some of the stories I've heard in the past are that there's a perception from the property owner that they make more by leaving the space vacant than they would if they leased it. And I'm wondering if you've seen any examples of municipalities that have successfully deployed the carrot to change that equation, or the stick, either way. I'm not particular on which one gets used in this case, because I think we're losing a lot with vacant store frontage, and any incentive we can apply to get those leased, similar to what the mayor was making reference to earlier, without costing our taxpayers a ton of money, would be the ideal option for me.
That's a good question. I don't think I have a great answer for you. It's something we can think about and look into a little bit. But I think, you know, sometimes what it comes down to is, you know, these larger strategies of just trying to activate these areas, these corridors that just don't have a lot of activity. And so, you know, some of those ideas from the tactical urbanism side, you know, it's a partnership, I guess, between the city, the EDDA chamber, and the property owners to, you know, to try to do things to activate the spaces where there's more consistent customer traffic, there's more visibility. You might be able to look at some things like, I don't know how often this would come into play, but, you know, fee deferrals, you know, where that lowers the upfront cost of someone coming into space, if they have to pay building permit and other types of fees, but they can, you know, pay them later once they're established and cash flowing, some things like that. Let us think on that a little. That's a really good question.
What about something like a vacancy tax or fee? Have you heard of that ever being used?
I've heard of that being used in the housing context, and it tends to be in very, very high cost resort areas. But I believe I'm not an attorney, and so I'm going to caveat the heck out of this. I believe in Colorado there is a provision in Tabor regarding differential taxation that makes it difficult to do a vacancy tax.
Got it. Thank you.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Member Mayor Pro Tem Ward. In fact, the city attorney and I were talking about this today during our one-on-one. We've got a draft that she's prepared. I think it's based on Pueblo, City of Pueblo, that's done something different. So I actually appreciate the question and think that this really is a combination of carrot and stick insofar as I think we need to be more aggressive, and I think that this plan is excellent in its recommendations to be more aggressive in those incentives, but I also think disincentives can be a very effective tool as well. So that's something that the city attorney and I have talked about pretty extensively.
Good to hear. I look forward to hearing more.
I'll go to Member Wink and then Member Woodward.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, City Manager Lewis. I wanted to say that I too wanted to hear more to the question of Mayor Pro Tem Ward, and to the extent possible from your group in terms of liaising, obviously, as you have been with our city administrators. I think this is a very critical piece that I don't think we should overlook. And so I'm grateful to hear that our city attorney and city manager are astutely working toward this end, but please, let's not underestimate, I think, what this could mean. Just based on our history, we started as this preeminent TOD in the Denver regional area, and
yeah, I know. It was
there are questions,
such
right?
an innovative project.
Yeah, like what happened, or how can we fix it? So,
yep. And it's on a lot of people's minds that we've
okay, good.
Thank you,
Mayor.
Member Woodward.
Thank you. I'd like to try and answer Member Ward's question regarding how it values out when it's vacant, especially when it's sat vacant for 20 years. And it has to do with who the ownership. If the ownership is large and it's a REIT or something like that with numerous investors, and they do quarterly reports of their finances, that sort of thing, and their vacancy, and then they put a pro forma number per square foot to that vacancy square footage. They cap out the numbers using that, and they have a higher value. So City Center here, the part that went bankrupt, which was owned by a REIT, showed that, but it showed it as a high value, even though it had never been leased and wasn't going to be leased because of where it was and stuff. That's why they do that, and that's how it happens. You get into smaller local type investors who are invested here, and they're looking at cash flow, they're looking at wealth management, that sort of thing. They will lower rate. And having done that as a primary business for me for just about 40 years, I'm real clear on how that works. So anyway, I hope that clears it up a little bit. But when you cap it out, it has a higher value.
Thank you. Actually, City Clerk, do you mind if I put you on the spot? Do you happen to have the answer to Member Woodward's? I know that it was in terms of the Littleton, what they're doing different than Inglewood. I know that we looked at food trucks here in Inglewood a couple years back. I'm starting to realize it probably was Assistant City Clerk McKinnon that actually looked into this, but do you know the difference between Littleton and Inglewood? I've heard things, but I would prefer not to speak out of turn, but.
I don't, but I can
Okay.
definitely get that for you.
Sounds good. City Manager Lewis?
Thank you, Mayor. We have done a number of things to try to improve the situation, starting with Assistant City Manager Dodd led a lean process improvement with all the people that touch food truck regulations and licensing in the city, streamlining that process. We also, in the last budget, did away with the kind of double fee that was on any worker that was working in a food truck. It's now one set fee, no matter how many workers you have in it, which was the main complaint that we were getting from food trucks. So I'm sure there's more that we can do. And I think that we have, I do wonder if there's a bit of legacy, criticism on this area, but we'll take another look at it and just survey some of the folks. You may remember at Block Party that one of your comments that was written on your board I saw afterwards was, "This is the best place to run a food truck in Colorado." Now, I noticed that guy's at every one of our events, so there may be commonality there, but we'll take another stab at looking at that and making sure it's working well.
Thank you, City Manager Lewis. I was gonna say, I really love the presentation tonight. I know that we could be doing more. I have a ton of ideas. I love the incubator idea that Member Anderson kind of like specified. I'm very interested to see what, I guess I'll just throw this out there just because I'm not sure what they're doing, but Comal, I believe they're in the Globeville area, but they're an incubator for disadvantaged, those that are economically disadvantaged. I believe they come from immigrant families as well, but they help them understand how to run a business, run restaurants. It's COMAL. I believe they became one of the 25 best restaurants in Denver. They were just named by 5280. But they're doing something, and they've been around for about 10 years, and I'm very curious about what they're doing because I would like to try to see if we can duplicate that here in the city. But also, the other aspect is I just have questions about how the wellness area came to be. Because they came out, to me, that actually like grew organically from where it was to where it is today. And I'm wondering, how can we do that within the city center and the South Broadway areas? And there's another aspect that I do want to understand is like, how are we marketing to all the businesses in the area? Do they know that we're the first point of contact for them? I'm thinking about the Citizen magazine, how we kind of communicate to our citizens about what we're doing in the city. Are we doing something similar for our businesses? And just try to understand that aspect of it. Because I think that we do have a lot of potential. We have a lot of space. We have underutilized space. And I'm just kind of curious where else we can take this. So I'm open for ideas. Obviously, we have a ton of them here. But I think this was a great presentation, and I appreciate you coming tonight, Mr. Duppany. So I don't see any other questions from council. Mr. Hollingsworth, if you have anything else to add.
Good evening, council. Thank you so much for this great feedback and discussion tonight. If it's the consent of council, we'd like to bring this forward for adoption by resolution at an upcoming council meeting, or if there's a need for further discussion, we're happy to have that as well.
Anybody have any issue with that coming forward? I don't see any jumping on, but no, I believe that we're in agreement with that, Mr. Hollingsworth. Mr. Duppany, thank you again for your presentation tonight.
Okay, thank you all. Thank all of you.
Thank
It's
you.
a pleasure.
All right, everyone, I think we're right on time. Are we? We are. There we go. Okay, if we could take a 10-minute break and come back here at 8 o'clock. Thank you.
talk to the mayor, that's fine. But, you know, I'm leaving for Texas tomorrow, and I'm packed. So when y'all go into executive session, I'm gonna go home and then do my city manager's report. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
All right, members of council, if we could be seated. All right, Mr. Dodd, we're on to agenda item 8, the strategic plan performance dashboard. Mr. Dodd is here to present and discuss the strategic plan performance dashboard.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tim Dodd, Assistant City Manager. So even though I'm the one presenting tonight, I can barely take the credit for this. So I do want to thank a few people. First of all, I want to thank Fletcher Johnson, who's a GIS administrator in what we call SPIDA. I can never remember the acronym, but basically our performance and data analytics and GIS division in IT. He did the bulk of the work on this. Also want to thank Lucia Magnuson in our communications department for quite a bit of work that she did on layout of this, and also for Jeremy King, our IT director, for his leadership on this. So this is really for informational purposes. I just wanted to share this with you. I do believe that I have given a few updates on this as part of the strategic planning process. As you know, for the first time that we believe we added performance metrics to the strategic plan. We added some data points from the citizen survey, but we also added KPIs, or key performance indicators, which are really meant to be output metrics to measure how well we're doing things. They measure efficiency and effectiveness. And so projects obviously are monitored by milestones and deliverables. They're usually new things. But we also wanted to make sure the strategic plan basically showed us how well we were doing existing things. And so this is the first time we've done it. It has a lot of room for growth. And so I would welcome your feedback today or at any point during this process. Right now, the metrics are being updated on a quarterly basis. They were selected by department. However, they are organized by outcome area and goal area in the strategic plan. You'll see on this dashboard that there are still some metrics that we're calling metrics in development. Those are metrics that we quite maybe don't have data for yet, or we're just trying to work through still. We do again plan to update this quarterly, so this has Q2 data on it, and it will have Q3 data probably by early November at the latest. So again, one thing to point out too is this was done not for free, but it was done with an existing contract. There are a lot of vendors and companies out there that do this. It can get very expensive. The last time I worked with a product like this, it was about $50,000 a year. And so we were able to do this with existing staff resources, as well as existing contract. So the plan is for this to go live this week. And again, it will be on our strategic plan website and complement our strategic planning work. So I'll just show you, this is what the homepage looks like. So again, it's organized by outcome area. The outcome statements are there for each area. And we really hope this will be a tool for the community to basically see our performance, how well we're doing. Most of our metrics right now are baseline metrics, which mean they don't have a target. We do plan in 2023 to start adding targets to most of them. Once we do that, this will change and it will show, on track, off track, close to the target, etc. You're not going to really see that yet, just because, again, we're still trying to baseline. We're still trying to collect enough data to find those targets. So I'll show you if I can navigate my mouse from far away. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with that. I will show you first just the community well-being one as an example. And there's a lot of data, so it is a little slow to load. So this shows what the goal areas are on top. And then it shows each metric, and it shows the data point towards them. If it's a metric in development without data yet, it's labeled as such. Each one, we wrote a description or a tag, and I may have trouble navigating this, I'm sorry, for each one. Sorry, I might not be able to do that. That basically provides additional context and data around what it is and what we have done. There's one example for lifelong learning. So again, these are all in the strategic plan, so it's not new material, it's just a new way of presenting it. We again know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of the layout and also in terms of functionality, but we just wanted to show it to you tonight as kind of our first crack of entering this world.
Thank you, Mr. Dodd, for the presentation and overview. Mayor Pro Tem, kicks us off.
One teeny tiny piece of feedback. If you go back to the homepage,
I'll try.
You'll you'll notice the first four items: infrastructure and transportation, safety, community well-being, and economy. It would be really nice to see the entire description instead of the ellipsis at the end of each one. I think even if you click on those pages, you won't see the whole goal. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
Teeny
But I think that's a good place to see the whole goal. The ones below, the icons are a little bigger, but even if you had to scroll the page a little bit, I think that whole goal would be good.
Sure.
That's pretty much all I have. I like the look of this, actually. It's helpful for figuring out what each item is and what it means and how we're doing on it.
Member Woodward.
Yeah, questions, just want to make sure I'm understanding what's going on here. On the very first item, community well-being, affordability, and then the number of energy efficiency program participants, 2. And then the next one, number of housing repair program participants, 1. Does that mean 2 people and 1 people? And are those community development programs where there's a certain amount of money and they're limited as to the number of participants?
Yeah, they're new participants, and that maybe should be clarified. So it's just participants during that quarter. And there is, I believe, there was a wait list for some of those programs at least.
Yeah.
So we should have some of that information in the description, but yes, it's new members.
Yeah,
new
when I was
participants.
seeing 1 and 2, I was thinking, oh my goodness, this isn't good. But if it's a program, then all of a sudden I start understanding it a little better. Thank you.
Yep.
Member Noonan-Camp.
Thank you for sharing this with us. I'm really thrilled to see this part of the strategic planning process come to fruition. I think having data-driven policy is really, really important for us. And so thank you for building this. I know this is not easy, building the baseline. I will withhold some small kind of formatting feedback, so I'm sure you already know and see it. But one suggestion I did have is, I understand, the idea of us building a baseline. Do any of these metrics already have any targets, or do none of them?
They do, and I can't tell you the exact number. I'm gonna guess 4 or 5, but if you want it to be entered as a council request, I'd be more than happy to get you the exact number and what they are.
I'm not as concerned about the exact number, although I appreciate the offer, but where we do have targets, I do think it's helpful to include that. And then also, if this is something that the citizens in the community will have access to, just providing some context about, because they might be saying, well, 1 participant, is that good, is that bad? And just kind of explaining that we're building a baseline this year, we'll have, more targets in years to come, so that it's clear to people who are trying to track how their tax dollars are being spent and how the city's working. But I think it's a really great start and excited to see it keep going.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and just to point out, so for the specific metrics, we've tried to have detailed descriptions. Again, one of the challenging things to both your comment and Member Ward's comment is just using, again, not free, but software that we already have that isn't fully built for this. Our IT and communications team did have to spend a lot of time on the formatting, but we definitely know that there's room to improvement. So we really appreciate your feedback, and if you have additional formatting ideas, please send them to me. I'd be happy to try to work on them.
Yeah, eventually I would love to see the targets in all of the descriptions when we have them. So the ones we do have, if we can include them, if that is feasible, I think that would make good sense. But then overall context would be great.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. This is looking great for where it's at in the process. I'm wondering how are people going to find this, and then kind of related to that, I know we're working on a dashboard specifically for the Tri-Cities Homelessness Action Plan. Will that be, connected to this, or are we going to have a place where people can go on our website and find all the different dashboards or data-oriented things that we have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think definitely the Tri-City is one, and also if there are other dashboards for other initiatives, we could certainly either host or cross-reference them. We have a performance and strategic planning website now, so that's where this is going to go. So that's where the actual strategic plan is located, and then there's also the quarterly updates that I provide to council and the PowerPoints on projects. Those are also there. So we hope to turn that into a hub, but I think that's a good point that we could work with our communications team to push this out so that people are aware that it exists and where it is.
Good. Thank you, Tim.
Member Russell?
Thank you. So mine is more of a specific question, and this is on neighborhoods and neighbor-to-neighbor connections. It says, number of completed mediations, and then it says, the metric is in development. The bottom line is, how many people are refusing mediation? Is there a way to track that as well?
I don't know, but we could certainly look into that.
Okay, the reason I'm asking that question is, in the past, and this is probably a couple of years ago, people would call with a code complaint. And then the city would come, or the police department or code, and want them to enter into mediation, which is then it's binding. And this one person that had called me, she said, why should I agree to mediate if my neighbor is violating the code? So is there a way to, because there are a lot of people that are not happy with this.
Sure, so if it's okay, Member Russell, perhaps we could follow up on a council request on that, but we could also, when council reviews the strategic plan and wants to make updates, we could certainly change the measurement too, or add a measurement related to that if you'd like to, if the council would like to.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Dodd, I love this dashboard. I'm kind of curious, once we start capturing all this data, will we have trend lines? Will we be able to see that it's 2022, 2023, 2024?
Yeah, that's absolutely the goal.
Okay.
Again, where we may at some point hit the limits of what we currently have. But yeah, what we want to be able to do is basically show it over 4 quarters over the course of a year, and then over time we want to be able to compare year to year.
Okay.
And then we also, ideally, we want to be able to have it so that people can export the data, if they want to, into Excel and, utilize it and review it on their own. So that's the ultimate goal we want to get to.
Okay, I think you kind of answered the question. Will we be able to drill down by quarters, like how the numbers fluctuate by Q1, Q2, Q3?
Yeah,
that type of
that's
thing,
the
because I see that being pretty helpful, at least from my perspective, for some of the utility, water, that type of stuff, some of the metrics that we're going to try to capture for that. We'd love to see that for those items. If you wouldn't mind just going back into the community well-being one. How granular are we getting down to some of these? Like the unique visits, are we talking like a true unique visit? John Doe came in, several times, or just, I'm just trying to figure out how are we doing, I'm just trying to figure out some of these numbers on this is.
Yeah, I think the goal with this one is to try to track unique visits. I don't know the mechanics of how they do that. I guess you have to probably register, and that's how they track it.
Okay. No, I really, really like this dashboard. So once we start getting a lot more data in here, I'm going to definitely take advantage of it. So I can see us definitely using this to potentially make some decisions based off of items on the agenda. So.
And if I could just ask Council a question. So in planning the retreat for January, I'm sure, strategic plan will be a part of it. Would you have any interest in, having kind of the metrics be a specific part, where we maybe look at what the metrics currently are, provide input on ideas to change them, modify them, and maybe start to look at some of the trend data, because at that point we'll have at least 2 quarters, if not 3.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see anyone saying no, but Member Woodward has a question. Do you have any further questions for Council? Member Woodward.
Okay. Question on the lifelong learning under the community well-being on that first page. I'm looking at 3 of them in a row, and they all have to do with the library. And I would think wouldn't we add in there the lifelong learning type things at Malley?
We certainly could. I mean, this is how it's currently situated, but we certainly could add Malley metrics.
It just seems like when I see lifelong, I think longer than than most things because of age, I guess.
Yeah,
But I-
this goal area, so one important thing to note about community well-being as an outcome area is that it's the newest, so it hasn't had the time to kind of have the same tweaks or studies, so to speak, that the other 6 areas have had. So there definitely may be areas like that we could cover and do a better job of. The goal of lifelong learning was essentially meant to basically apply to any kind of learning that anyone at any age could do. So I definitely agree that Mally programs could be a good addition.
Or maybe it's a separate line under community well-being, Mally. I mean, I was thinking of the most recent one was the safety one. And in the spring, there's, I don't remember what it's called, the well-being one, where all these different groups come in with different programs for all kinds of things, housing, just all kinds of things. So they're big programs and they're pretty successful. So maybe we could add that in under Mally.
Anything else, Member Woodward?
End of lifetime.
Oh, boy.
Member Wink.
I concur, thank you, Mayor. I concur that perhaps we want those metrics as well from Mally. I do think it will cost us nothing to sort of mark those as a little bit, separate in terms of how we can analyze that. And I do disagree about your definition of lifelong learning. I think it means no matter your age or where you are in your life, you can learn until you're 90 if you want, but not.
Oh, no, I agree.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I beg your pardon then. But I almost have a feeling that there's a little different trajectory of this, but maybe I'm wrong. But I will say, however we resolve that matter, Assistant City Manager Dodd, that I think it would be absolutely fantastic to go over something as valuable as this and as representative of our strategic initiatives. I mean, it's a great manifestation of our successes and opportunities. So yeah, in the retreat, I'd love to go over this. Thanks, Mayor.
Yep. Member Russell.
Thank you. I guess I have a couple of questions. One of them is on neighborhoods again. And it's talks about the percent of documents, programs, processes involving community engagement that utilize Engage to solicit input from the public. There's a lot of them on the video views, social media views, email subscribers, number of Polco subscribers. How are we reaching the public that does not have electronic communication? Because there's a substantial amount that do not.
It's also a great question, and I think Chris Hargith, our communications team, would probably be more expert in answering that than I am. Again, I think if you're amenable to council requests, I think we'd probably get more detailed information about that.
Okay, thank you. But I think that's something that we need to include in the tracking also. Then the other thing is under sustainability, and it says community resilience, percent of waitlisted residential E3 program participants moved from waitlist, and it says 100%. So my question is, did we just delete all the people on the wait list, or did we actually contact them?
I don't know, but I'm hoping that they were contacted. So yeah, I think the number was 2 people were moved from the wait list. So I think the idea was that there were 2 people on the wait list and that they were moved off of it. But
And Mayor, Member Russell, we did allocate some more funding to that program last year so that we could address the people on the wait list.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any further questions from council?
No.
Mr. Dodd, thank you so much for the presentation.
thank you.
All right, everyone, I think we are now to the portion that starts the special meeting. So we're now on to agenda item 9, resolution authorizing the city manager to approve the 2023 insurance letter agreement. Assistant City Manager Dodd, are you taking this as well, or do we have Director of Human Resources Sean Weisky on?
I'm here
I
as well,
believe
Mayor.
Director Whiskey's
Oh,
on the
there we go.
call and that he's gonna handle it.
Good evening, Director.
Good evening. I did not have a presentation, but I am here to respond to any questions.
Sounds good. Are there any questions from council regarding the resolution? Member Russell?
Thank you. So are we just giving permission, because it's already been decided? I mean, it's already budgeted for, but the signatures haven't been obtained yet.
You're correct. The negotiations have already happened. We've budgeted for it. So this is the official sign off from council that you agreed for us to enter into that agreement.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mayor, if I could?
Yes, City
add to
Manager.
that too as well. In addition to what Director Weisky said, you may remember that a few years ago, the city was not bringing this to council. So we have attempted to make sure we are following our purchasing law and have you approve items that are over the required dollar amount. What I will say is that we are glad to provide any additional information about the plans, about the RFPs that we received from this to discuss this further. But after analyzing, this was by hundreds of thousands of dollars the best deal that we could get, and also allows us to keep our current coverage that we have for our employees through 2023 with a, what I'm finding from talking to other cities, a pretty nominal increase.
Thank you, City Manager. Any further questions? Mayor Pro Tem?
I think I'd be remiss here if I didn't bring up one concern that always comes up when I hear the word Kaiser, and that's the way Kaiser handles mental health. Director Weisky, you might have something to say about some supplemental services we have, like an employee assistance program that can help with some mental health issues. But I do have to go on record saying the Ward household in particular has had a very bad experience with Kaiser's mental health apparatus. It's been several years, but it is concerning. I want to make sure that whatever insurance we provide to our employees in the future handles all aspects of the employee's needs, including mental health care.
Director, is there anything that you want to add?
As Mayor Pro Tem was alluding to, we do have an employee assistance program for any employees that might find it difficult to find mental health services through Kaiser. You are allotted, I believe it's 6 free sessions. So that is something that if you're interested in, we do offer as well. But if you are having those issues, please, you can come talk to my office as well, and maybe we could get you connected with some resources as well.
Really appreciate it, Director. Any further questions? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the city manager to approve 2023 insurance letter?
I'll move the motion.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Could I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Any further comments? Seeing none, can we please vote?
Member Anderson.
Aye.
Member Noonan.
Aye.
Member Russell.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward.
Aye.
Member Wink.
Aye.
Member Woodward.
Aye.
Mayor C.R.S.
Aye.
Let the record show 7 ayes.
Thank you, City Clerk. We're now moving on to Mayor's Choice. We have an executive session for personal matters under C.R.S. Section 246402. Let's see here. So first, for personal matters under C.R.S. Section 246402 4F1, specific to the amendments to the city attorney's contract with outside counsel Catherine Sellers, although we don't have Catherine Sellers tonight, so let me remove that portion. But present at the exec session are the following persons: Mayor Nathaniel Sierra, Mayor Pro Tem Stephen Ward, council members Rita Russell, Joe Anderson, Chelsea Noonan-Camp, Jim Woodward, Cheryl Wink, and City Attorney Tamara Niles. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Can we please vote?
Member Anderson.
Aye.
Member Noonan.
Aye.
Member Russell.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward.
Aye.
Member Wink.
Aye.
Member Woodward.
Aye.
Mayor C.R.S.
Aye.
Let the record show 7 ayes.
All right, so we will now exit this meeting and we'll reconvene next door in the community room. City Attorney Niles, we're gonna go ahead and just start this meeting first, internally, and then we'll bring you in when we're ready. Thank you.
Hi, control room. This is Sean. I'm online as a panelist. Can you hear me okay? Or Ryan?
Yeah, I can hear you, Sean.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, everyone, so the time is now 9:26, and the executive session has been concluded. Present at the executive sessions are the following persons: Mayor Nathaniel Sierra, Mayor Pro Tem Stephen Ward, council members Rita Russell, Joe Anderson, Chelsea Noonan-Camp, Jim Woodward, Cheryl Wink, and City Attorney Tamara Niles. I move to close this executive session. May I have a second?
Second.
Can we please vote?
Member Anderson,
Aye.
Member Noonan-Camp,
Aye.
Member Russell,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward,
Aye.
Member Wink,
Aye.
Member Woodward,
Aye.
Mayor Sierra.
Aye.
Let the record show 7 ayes.
Thank you. For the record, if any person who participated in the executive session believes that any substantial discussion of any matters not included in the motion to go into the executive session occurred in the executive session, or that any improper action occurred during the executive session in violation of the open meetings law, I would ask that you state your concern for the record. Hearing none, we are now moving on to reports. Oh, no, excuse me, we're still on Mayor's Choice. So discussion regarding the October 17th regular meeting. As part of the mayor managers meetings this past Wednesday, we became aware that there are no study session items for this coming Monday's regular meeting. I know that we have been looking to start the regular meeting at 7 o'clock on a consistent basis, but wanted to bring it to this council's attention and see if anybody was opposed to actually starting the regular meeting at 6 p.m. Member Noonan-Camp.
I'll just wait and say I'm not opposed. If we could just make sure that it's clearly noted on the agenda so that it's clear to citizens who may not be tracking. And I know we've been in the habit of putting announcements about our meetings on social media, maybe noting that there as well for the citizens.
Thank you, Member Noonan-Camp. Member Anderson?
Is it a longer, are we expecting a long agenda? Or is
There's a lot of items on the agenda. There's a lot of consent agenda items. It was pretty lengthy, but I want to say a lot of it was on consent. But City Clerk, any thoughts on this?
I think we have over 25 items, but again, the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem were pretty diligent about assigning consent, and some of those were second readings.
I'm hesitant because we've tried to make it really consistent that we're starting these meetings at 7 and public comment comes shortly after. Is there a way to agenda the meeting such that public comment comes at 7 o'clock? Could we do some other stuff first, or is that?
I think you
breaking
could
the norm
just
too much?
motion to table, motion to bring, like, we can't change the actual agenda because of the numbering and the way that it's numbered, but you could just
We
make a
could change it on
motion
the spot.
to entertain public comment at 7 p.m. wherever you're at on the agenda.
That would be my preference, and then note it on the, the social media and on the agenda that public comment will be at 7. If that's amenable to council, then we can just work through consent agenda and on into start working through the, whatever ordinances or motions we have, and then stop wherever we're at, right around 7 to do public comment.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Mayor Pro Tem.
I actually don't like that solution very much, and I view one of the purposes of public comment to comment on the upcoming agenda items. I think if we hear any of those agenda items in our regular meeting prior to public comment, we're denying the public their right to comment on what's coming forward on the agenda. So I would not support that. I'm in the consistency camp on this, despite the length of the agenda. I think the 7 o'clock rule works well, and it's good for our public to provide them with consistency. I'd be willing to hear 6 o'clock if public comment were to begin at 6.
I'll chime in. I would like the meeting to start at 6 o'clock with the public comment to start at 6 o'clock as well, or soon thereafter. So, Member Woodward.
I would tend to agree with Mayor Pro Tem Ward that 7 o'clock is when we should start. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Russell.
Thank you. I agree that we should start at 7 o'clock with public comment at 7. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Anderson.
I would prefer to start at 7, rather than have public comment at 6.
I think that gets us majority. Anyone else want to chime in? So we will be starting the meeting at 7 o'clock next Monday. Okay. And nothing else for me for Mayor's Choice. I thought I did have something else, but I can't recall what it is off the top of my head. But moving on now to reports for boards and commissions. Go ahead, Member Noonan-Kemp.
Cultural Arts Commission met this last week, and they are very busy. They had a very robust agenda, and I just wanted to notify council of a few things that are coming up. One is that it's actually a really great story. I'm hoping we can tell it maybe through the Citizen magazine or something, but the Cushing Park neighborhood has organized through the neighborhood program, and they have come and they've received a city grant. They've also received funding from the Cultural Arts Commission to beautify the vacant lot at Floyd and Cherokee, which you may be familiar with. And there will be, going in over the next few weeks, a mural that will be painted in conjunction with the high school and local artists on the lot. Some really cool 3D graphics. There will be planters, there will be a little library and benches and places to sit. And they've been working on this for several months. So over the next couple of weeks, they'll be unveiling that and completing that. And it's been a really amazing community effort and a testament to what citizens can do to beautify their neighborhoods through the resources available from the city. So really excited to see that come to fruition. They are also finalizing a call for new public art in the city. There will be some new median art. As they are that the corridor entry on the west side of the Hampton kind of entry to the city, and they are putting out a call for sculptures. There's any sculpture artist in Colorado can respond to the call to submit their designs to have new public art in Inglewood. So that will be coming soon as well. That group, the commission, is also in the very beginnings, and they've discussed this in the past, but they're discussing again the idea of an arts district, a creative district in Inglewood. Does Inglewood have the kind of density of the artist community, and what would an arts or a creative district mean to also our economic development plans in the city? So there's some interest in that group to pursue that through the Office of Economic Development with the state and the Colorado Creative Industries program. So they are going to be reaching out to Darren Hollingsworth and Economic Development to see if that's something that they want to pursue or explore. And then they're also continuing to meet with local artists, have a really vibrant regular gathering of local artists that the commission's working with to see what the next activities and events that they'll be planning. So lots happening on the Cultural Arts Commission.
Thank you, Member Noonan-Kemp. Anyone else? Member Woodward?
Just a reminder that Thursday, 5:30, there's the dedication ribbon cutting for the skate park at Cushing Park. So hope some folks will come. I think Cheryl may come. She lives close there.
Thank you.
Anyone else you want to volunteer for that night, Member Woodward?
No, I will be there. No volunteering. I will be there for sure. 5:30.
Yeah, I will try to make it that night as well. So anybody else for council member's choice? Seeing none, I'll move it over to city manager's choice.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few things. Thank you, Member Woodward, for mentioning the Cushing Park ribbon cutting. We also are going to be dedicating the skate park and fitness court as part of that ribbon cutting. If you haven't been by there, that skate park is covered up with folks. We had it fenced off, waiting for the final touches, and people were just crawling over the fences to get to it. We were afraid when we opened the fences that they would no longer be interested, but luckily it's still covered up. We also just want to remind businesses and organizations they can sign up for Trunk or Treat. That's going to be October 22nd in the Civic Center, second floor parking lot. Just one quick update on the RTD elevator. That work is going to resume October 13th with final inspection October 20th. We've been keeping our partners at RTD up to date on that. That was delayed because there was some equipment that was actually stolen from the site. So really disappointing to have lost a heat sensor and a protection device over the unit before we could finish installation. And last but not least, on a high note, the Refresh and Renew grant that community development has been offering has been fully utilized at 30 grants that have been awarded for that. That was a strong partnership between us and Lindsay and the Greater Inglewood Chamber of Commerce. So just really appreciate the great work that community development and our partnership with the chamber on that. Glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, City Manager. Any questions for City Manager Lewis? No questions, City Manager. Perfect. With nothing else, our meeting is now adjourned. Everyone, we may see you on Thursday or next Monday. So have a good evening.